Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Fridays. Today I've got a design for you, so let's get started. Today we're going to have a look at one of the standard design styles, the basic modern. Now, every organisation in every country has a manual that defines design styles for you for any particular competition. I'm going to use the Australian one, naturally enough. Surprise, surprise. And I'm going to read from that what the definition of a modern design style is. Now, it's very easy to get confused between modern and contemporary, and I do it probably every time I have to look at those design styles in a competition. So it's really good to refer back to the manual to look at what a design style is. Now, modern designs came about as a movement of the 20th century. So they're effectively the designs of the 20th century, and they were developed in the 1960s and the 1970s. So if you keep that in mind, you keep 60s and 70s in mind, that is the design style that the judges will be looking for. So it's not contemporary, it's not of today, it is modern in terms of a comparison with traditional designs, which would be the pedestal designs, the things that you might see most often in a church, or you would think of as a flower arrangement as such. Those all have very, very strict categories as well, and over time I'll go through all of the design styles that you might come across in a competition. But a basic modern design style is a pretty good design style to use when you're first starting, because it's a simple style. It's very straightforward, it's very defined, it uses a minimum amount of material, and so that's probably the most important thing. I'll just read you what it says in the definition. Basic modern is a tailored design using a minimum of material with strong impact. It has one centre of interest coinciding with the point of emergence from your container, and that's normally known as radial construction. This is the simplest of the modern or 20th century designs. The few but significant pieces of good quality clear-cut plant material should be chosen to create height or width and interesting spaces, contrasts of form and texture and rhythm. Some plant material needs to unify and harmonise with the modern concept container. Mechanics should be inconspicuous. A pin holder might be the best option for you to use rather than foam. No unnecessary material which may detract from the tailored effect and the strong impact, and reinforcing a minimum amount of material for a maximum effect. So before I actually move on to the design, I'm going to show you some examples of containers that you might use and the things that you might think about when you're doing the basic modern design. So here's one I prepared earlier. This is in fact a candlestick, a candle holder, and it has some glass cups that fit into these hooks here. At the moment it's covered with string because I use it for a different design, and it has, as you can see, some water vials that are covered in foliage as well. But what we're looking at is the line of this design. Now without the covering, it's this black metal colour, which could be quite dominant. It would be difficult for you to soften that with a minimum amount of plant material and not make it look too fussy. Very definite line, so it does fit into the modern design style. What I've done here, which is drying out now, is I actually covered this particular arm with foliage, so it had the green foliage going that way, a little bit of foliage around each of these glass vials, which you couldn't see because the judge would look at from the front. But it just blended it in. Covered this with string, which most judges will consider as a plant material because it does come from a plant originally. Softens the line, softens the colour, doesn't make you look at the container rather than the flowers. And then two very dominant, very striking flowers went into the top of this too. And the shape of the flower followed the form that was being presented. So I actually had oriental lilies in it, just the single flower, no stalk, no other foliage at all, just the flower, because the shape of the petals and the shape of the flower as a whole followed those lines and the greenery was here, and then I had a large leaf on the base to cover this metal base. If I can find a photo that's good enough, I'll put it up as well. Another container. Now the containers, for the most part, your judges will be looking for metal, glass or ceramic, because that's the sorts of things that were introduced in the 60s and 70s. You know, if you think about what home decor was like, that's the sort of thing that you should incorporate into your floral design. So big, bold colours, definite lines. This is a great little glass vase. It's black, so I'd have to be very careful about not leaving that dominant in the design and making sure that the plant material was the hero rather than the container. And then actually, when I do the design, I'm going to show you how to use this particular one. It's a great little single height vase. Here's another one. Another glass vase. I find this one quite difficult to use because it is very tall. And so if you thought about actually matching the height, you'd have to go enormous. But it does have very definite shape. It is very dramatic. It's an interesting colour, a difficult colour to work with, but gives me a bit of a challenge. And so I keep it around just to see, and I'm actually going to use that in a competition next week. So I might update the video with how we went with this particular one. This one is a container that could be used for a contemporary as well as for a modern piece. Again, it's a very dominant container, so we're going to have to be careful about breaking up that very smooth and shiny surface with some other texture and some colour, or something that breaks up the dominance of this container. It's got this great little hole in the middle, so we can use that to some extent as the point of emergence, as we talked about, and have a different kind of but dramatic design. And this is the one that I'm going to use for the main design. So you'll see how we put that together shortly. Now this last one, if you were looking at stepping out of the square of actually using an existing container and thought about just the pin holder and how you could minimise the container dominance in a design, then I would suggest you start to think about using natural material. So this is just, you can see it's well used, needs to be repainted. Just a timber baseboard, and what I've got is this absolutely fabulous bit of twisted vine pulled off the farm. Dad pulled down a tree and said, "Do you want this?" And I said, "Yes, I do, absolutely." And it's just screwed to the base. I have used this quite extensively, so it's having a hiatus at the moment. It's having a rest because too many judges have seen it, so they know that it's mine, and so I'll give it a rest for a while and then bring it back into competition in maybe another 12 months' time. With this one, my most successful design with this one, very simply 3 strelitzia, 3 bird of paradise flowers, 1, 2, 3, all facing different ways, and a palm leaf on the base, and that was it. The strelitzias were placed in a pin holder that was covered with moss, but a very minimal amount of material. And as you can imagine, and there'll be photos at the end of the video, a very striking design. Very much an example of a basic modern design. So that gives you a little bit of insight into the sorts of containers and the thinking that goes into getting yourself organised for a basic modern design. Let's go now and actually put one together, or put 2 together in the And so to our basic modern designs, we're going to use the 2 of the containers that I talked to you about earlier. What I didn't mention earlier was that I thought to remind us all of the premise for basic modern designs, I'd better dress in the basic modern fashion. So I have my 60s tie-dyed dress on, nice and loose and cool. It is a very hot day here today, so if you see me wiping my brow, that's particularly because of the weather outside today. What I did first of all was have a wander around and look at the sorts of material I could use. Remember, we're talking about very definite lines, very simple but effective designs, minimum amount of material for the maximum effect. So we want things that will create a line that are going to contrast with our two containers. So we've got one that's shiny, we've got one that's matte. So I had a look first of all at some interesting sticks and branches, and I had a look at some bark, and then I went into the actual foliage. So I looked at something that was both shiny and nice and smooth. Looked at some rougher pieces of foliage, but in the end I decided I probably wouldn't use them because they weren't big enough. You know, we want something that's bold in these designs. And then I looked at what sort of bold flowers I could find. Child of the 60s, almost. And this will work in a basic modern design. The good old gerbera, a nice bright colour against the black containers. So let's see what we can do with our first container. And I'm going to stand up because I find it easier to work that way, so you won't see my head for a little bit, but every now and then it'll probably drop down as I try to mix and match what I'm doing. So first of all, I looked at whether I could use the bark. Remember, we've got this container, it's very shiny, it's very black, there's a lot of it, so we're going to have to do something to break up this portion of the container so that that doesn't become the dominant feature of the design. And we've got this great little hole here, and we want to be able to use that in some way, perhaps as the point of emergence for the plant material, perhaps as some other part of the actual design. And it might well be that that becomes the space, the negative area of the design, and we have the point of emergence from the top. I have in here a pin holder that I've already put into the container simply because it's awkward to get in, and I didn't want to waste time trying to, while you watched me maneuver it with a couple of sticks. So first of all, what I looked at is, would the bark work with this? Would the bark break this up in some way? And what I found was the bark was still a little bit too shiny, a little bit too smooth to contrast enough with the texture of the container. So we'll put that aside and we'll use that a bit later. What I did discover though was the sticks, and the sticks work really well. And what works well is to have them outside the container. Now if you're going to have something like that, you need to have another piece that unifies the design, and that's what this one will be. But we're not going to put that on until the end because we need to fix it to the design once it's the front of the design's actually finished. So just resting on there, you can see already that it's breaking up the smoothness and the shininess of that design, and the container becomes less dominant because you're drawn to the lines of this nice piece of twig. What we need to think about now is our flowers. And you can see this poor old gerbera's had better days. It's bent on the stem, which I could get away with wiring it to hold it up straight, but it is very burnt on the edges of the petals, so we won't worry about using that one. Now this is another one that has bent itself, but I'm actually going to use that because I don't need the full length of stalk in the other design, so I'll probably use that one in the other design. And as I said, I could probably wire them if I needed to. So that leaves us with 3. So we'd normally use 1 or 3 bits of floral material in a design, and I'm thinking that what I'd like perhaps is to have 1 there, and perhaps have the 1 above it and then 1 above it again. So it's just the 3 in a line that follows the line of this twig, and then we'll have the twig at the back that frames it at the back, gives the design some depth. Let's see how we go with that. So we'll put this one in first of all. So this one, find where the Kenzan is so we can get it into that, so it will stay. Probably still a bit tall. Bring it down a bit further. I might put the stick down while we do this, while we manoeuvre this into the Kenzan. As you can see already, I'm just going to have a look around at it myself because I just want to make sure that you can see that, and you can see that there's a little bit of space around it. So it's giving not only depth, but it's giving a bit of interest, and that negative space is working in the design. So then we want to place another one there and another one there. So then all we want to do is add a little bit of height. We want to bring our eye back around into the design, so we have the stick facing this way, facing forward, rather than that way, or any of the that way, or that way. We could have it that way, but we're losing the sides. So we want to have it, no, that way. So we get the nice height on the design. And of course today it's going to balance. Magic. The magic of the video camera. It's performing for the camera. But I will put a bit of tape on it anyway because I want to move it around a little bit and I don't want it to fall apart while I'm showing you the next design. So there we have our first basic modern design. Very clear, very definite lines. Minimum amount of material. You can see I've used no foliage at all. We've broken up the container so that it's not quite as dominant as it was before by bringing in some very bold colours, some very striking flowers, and the roughness of the texture of the bark to contrast with the smoothness and the shininess of our container here. Let's move that one to one side and we will work on our second one. Now this container, by comparison, is a matte finish, and it also has a little bit of twist, so a little bit of texture in the vase itself. What I particularly like about this one is the shape at the top. You know, it very much reminds me of an anthurium, and so as a single vase with a single flower in it, it would be just perfect to have the stem of the anthurium come up through there and perhaps sit at about that height and be mirrored by this container at the base. And anthuriums come in some good, you know, the deep red or the bright pink. Either of those would work really well. Something that's going to contrast and work with the black really well. What I'm going to use the lip for, though, on this particular occasion is as a rest for that piece of bark that we looked at previously. Because this, again, is going to have a minimum amount of material, as you would expect, but it's going to be very different to our first design. This piece of bark, as you can see, will sit either way quite nicely and gives us a good long line. What I want to do though is make sure that I've got the shiny bit at the front and that I've got this little hole that gives us again that negative space, gives us depth in the design. What I have done though, you'll be able to see, is I've made a hole in the bark because that's where I'm going to place, I'm going to actually place my foliage, my feature foliage piece through that and into the vase itself. Let me do that for you and show you what happens and what a difference it makes to that vase as soon as we do that. Suddenly, the vase is not all that important because what you're seeing is this mess that she's made on the desk. You're seeing this lovely piece of bark and a nice solid bit of green foliage, a beautiful leaf, perfectly formed, interesting to look at. So the vase itself just becomes the stand for this floral material. Then all we're going to do is add a single flower in the front here, one of those gerbers with the shorter stem because it can just go into the vase, and I'm actually going to put it in front of the bark so that it gives us again a little bit more depth to the design. So use this one. Now this would probably benefit from, I'm just going to spin it around so I can get it in the right spot rather than do it from above. This would probably benefit from having some wire so that I could actually face it the way I want to, but we'll see if we can manipulate it. Looks right to me. There we are. A different basic modern, but a basic modern nonetheless. Simple, clean, clear lines, minimum amount of material, maximum impact. A good contrast of textures and forms, so but still maintaining a nice shape, that triangular shape that we promote so often. Good line material in the bark, a bit of interest, a bit of different textures, as I said before, all of the things that I talked about initially in the definition. So there we are, our 2 examples of basic modern. Please have a go at it and send me some photos, and certainly I can give you some tips on how you're going or what else you might like to consider in the designs that you have done already when you're looking at basic modern. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Fridays.
Now it's time for you to try that out. Join me again for more tips and techniques so that you can create awesome floral designs. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Fridays.